the things I wanted to ask you about is particularly a conversation you had a couple of days ago with a woman named Courtney
Yes,
about the
about the
test.
the Deuteronomy virginity test in Deuteronomy 22.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, do you think that that's like a good thing to bring up against Christians as if, I guess I'm trying to figure out what's the purpose of bringing that up?
Why mention it? Do you mean why would I
Yes.
mention that? Well, I
Yes.
mention it as an example of a law passed to Israel from God via Moses, which was both, it managed to be both immoral and incompetent all at once. And so it's really it's a way of demonstrating that if we are assuming the truth of this of the Bible, if we're assuming that this is true, if we're assuming that the creator of the entire universe came up with a set of guidelines for how to live a good life and imparted them to his chosen people through his guy on earth, and as part of that, he created a law which would have necessarily involved innocent women being stoned to death, that says something about his competence and character, wouldn't you think?
Well, see, I mean, I would probably not agree with the premise that it was incompetent or immoral
Well,
myself.
okay, so let's look at this. Is God familiar with female anatomy? Presumably, being the
Sure.
designer of it, he would be, right? So God
Yes.
knows that only a certain percentage of women bleed the first time they have intercourse, right? He would know that. So why would he create a
Well, I
law?
don't know what the percentage would have been
But
then. I don't know if we
it
would
would
get
be
that
exactly
stat
the
from.
same then as now. We have no reason to believe that women a few thousand years ago had bionic hymens, and in fact, it is documented in literature around that time that it was understood that women could lose their hymens through exercise or riding horses or going up and down stairs or things like. There were situations where that could happen. So we have absolutely no reason to believe that
You
that
don't think
women
they could take
were
that into account, though?
that the anatomy of women was significantly different a few thousand years ago. So, given that that's the case, we can assume that a good number of women that would have failed this test, for anyone who doesn't know, just in a nutshell, this was an idea that if a man accused his new bride of not being a virgin because she didn't obviously bleed on their wedding night, he could bring that accusation against her, and then it would be incumbent on her and her family to prove that she was a virgin. And the test for the virginity was to show the cloth from the marital bed, and if the cloth wasn't stained with blood, then it was deemed that she wasn't a virgin, and she would be stoned to death. If there was blood there, he would have to pay a fine to the woman's father for slandering her. But if they couldn't prove with blood on the
Well, it would
cloth,
be more than just a fine.
it was 100 shekel fine paid to the father.
No, it's
So
actually 39 lashings minus one could be
it doesn't
the
say
fine.
that in the Deuteronomic law. So and
Yeah,
even if
it
that
actually does
and
in
even
that
if that
passage.
were the case, and even if
It
that were
doesn't
the
give
case,
the number, but it does say that you should take him out and whip him.
I don't believe it does. Shall we have a look at the verse?
Sure.
Yeah, let's have a look at the verse, and you can point out the part where it talks about ripping, taking him out and whipping him. So suppose a man marries a woman. I wasn't going to read this today, but there we are. But after going into her, dislikes her and makes up charges against her, slandering her by saying, I married this woman, but when I lay with her, I did not find evidence of virginity. The father of the young woman and her mother shall then submit the evidence of the young woman's virginity to the elders of the city at the gate. The father of the young woman shall say, I gave my daughter in marriage, blah, 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 blah. But the man has made up charges against her, saying, I did not find evidence, but here is the evidence. They shall spread out the cloth. The elders of the town shall take the man and punish him. They shall fine him 100 shekels of silver.
There you go. Where it says punishing.
Yeah,
If you
it
look
says that,
at the Hebrew there,
right?
and some, I believe it's the English Standard Version, will say take him out and whip him. So the punishment there
Right.
would be like some sort of
Okay.
whipping.
Well, if that's
Yeah.
the case, then I would concede that point. But it doesn't change the moral calculus about the brutality that happens next, which is if there is not evidence of the woman's virginity on the cloth, then what happens to her?
Well, where are you saying that there's not evidence on the cloth? Where does it say
So
that?
it says here, if, however, this charge is true, that evidence of the young woman's virginity was not found,
Okay.
then they shall bring the young woman out to the entrance of her father's house, and the men shall stone her to death. So
It's a continuation of the previous where it showed in the previous chapter they're spreading out the cloth to find tokens of her virginity, which is understood to be blood.
Deuteronomy 21 talks about this too. Is that what you're saying?
no,
No, I'm
he's
saying
just
no. When I said
But
he's just
I meant
from
to
the
say
previous
paragraph.
chapter then.
I said chapter. I misspoke. I meant to say paragraph. That's my fault.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So
Okay.
so basically, if they don't find the tokens of virginity being blood on the cloth, they assume that she's not a virgin and that she deserves the death penalty. This is morally
Well,
idiotic.
see, it's funny because I've never really read it like that. That's
Oh,
why
really?
I'm kind of, yeah. When I read that, it says, if they found that this is true and there's no evidence found. So it seems to be the case here that it's just simply saying, yes, she did actually cheat on him. This is actually true. That's how I've always read that when it says that there. So
Well,
I guess I'm just curious to see
yeah.
why does that, when you see the truth of it there, says if this is true and no evidence is found. So it almost seems to be the case here. Not only can it be true, you also have to have no evidence that
It doesn't actually say "and"
Yeah.
there. It says, if,
that's
however,
kinda-
the charge is true, that the evidence of the young woman's virginity was not found. In other words, they
Yes.
haven't found evidence of her virginity. What
But it also
what
says
type
it's
of evidence might they find?
Well, I mean, there could be other things as well. Maybe somebody's testimony. Yes, she slept with me prior or something like that. I don't know.
What's
Well,
the
it does-
test that they prescribe?
Well, it doesn't actually. Here it talks about the cloth. They can bring out this, but from what I have looked into this, is when the tradition was that when this happened, somebody else took the cloth and kept it in their possession. Who that was, I don't know. I don't know if it's the parents or who it was. So
was
the
given to the
idea would have
parents.
been
It's given to the parents.
it was given to the parents. Who took it, I don't know. But the idea here would be that the husband himself would not know really necessarily either. So if he's going to make this false accusation, he wouldn't necessarily know, and so he would be less likely to make a false accusation.
So
if
what's
it's
the
possible
test?
someone to give evidence.
So what's the test that it prescribes in the text we just read?
There's no test it prescribes.
Well,
No, it literally does.
the test is
No, there's no
the cloth.
test. You're just talking about the cloth.
The
I
test
think you're
is the
confusing
cloth.
that with
That's the
Numbers chapter
evidence.
5.
That's
you're
the
saying-
yeah.
yeah,
No,
that's the
Numbers chapter 5 is the holy abortion procedure. We can talk about that too if you want. But
Well, I wouldn't do that either,
this is
but that's
this
what
is
they
the
call a
yeah.
test thing. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a different question, because I absolutely reject your post hoc framing that there would be some additional kind of evidence that would be required to
Well,
conclude
could I ask
that
you one
she
question before
wasn't.
you ask me a question?
I'm
Because
going to ask you this.
I heard you say something like 43% don't bleed on their wedding night. Did
I
you
think
know?
it's do bleed.
It's-
I could look. I might be.
something
It's
like
a
that. I can't remember what it was.
a significant enough number do not bleed as so as to make this a completely
Well,
ridiculous.
let me ask you this
test.
question. Did you know also, according to that source, that 0.03% of women lack a hymen, which means 99.9% of all women always have a hymen. This is very rare that they're ever born
Are
without a
you
hymen.
aware of the fact
was-
that there are lots of ways for women for their hymen to break?
Sure, yeah. I would agree with that.
So that statistic is
But
irrelevant.
would you
So
agree? You're saying that stat is legit, right?
what's that?
That
That-
99.9% of all women actually
I'm saying it's
have a
completely
hymen
it's completely irrelevant.
before they have
Totally
sex,
irrelevant.
right?
It's totally irrelevant.
But
It's
I'm
n-
just
it's-
saying here, if it's the case, though, if it's the case that 99.9% of all women have a hymen, and that we would agree it gets, maybe through some sort of activity, something happens causing the hymen to break and bleed. We could agree there, but I'm just saying, does that make any consideration? Does that change this any meaning that God
None.
would have known?
Absolutely
that
none. This is an
women
idiotic
have
law.
hymens, right,
No,
that
it's
break,
an idiotic law because a significant number of women, would not provide the proof required by this idiotic legislation of their virginity on the consummation of their marriage. Now, I'm going to ask you something else. Let's imagine it turned out that this charge was true and the woman actually wasn't a virgin, right? We're talking here about, in the historical context here, a lot of these women being married at this. Well, we're talking here about young girls, right? They're basically going to be quite young girls. Would be these women. We're imagining sort of adult women. Quite a lot of these would be teenagers. They would be young women. Now, it is conceivable that some of them may not have been virgins. Let's look at two scenarios, right? One is a scenario where one of the women might have been a victim of some kind of unwanted activity beforehand, which robbed her of her virginity. And the other is, let's imagine it's a woman who actually consented to some kind of activity beforehand, which removed her virginity. In either of those cases, do you think she deserved the death penalty? Is that your view?
Well, I mean, as far as the grape situation, I mean, presumably that would be a situation where it would have been known about ahead of time, and I would expect her to have revealed this to her husband ahead of time.
Oh, really?
He would have known about it.
So is it not possible that this was something? Do you think all victims of rape speak about it freely to everyone? You don't think anyone holds it in, feels a sense of shame, keeps it secret to themselves, deals daily with the pain? Are you really suggesting that? Because that's a pretty disgusting thing to
when you commit yourself to someone for life,
right.
I'd expect you to reveal that information to them.
Right. Then I'd expect you to read a little bit on the literature of women who suffer sexual assault and what their experiences are and how they internalize the shame of it. And they don't all go running to tell people about it. That's a fucking ridiculous view. You should be ashamed of yourself for saying that. You should be ashamed of yourself for saying that. So in that scenario, that's completely
ashamed of myself for
you should be. And even in the scenario where it wasn't, where it wasn't rape, if it was that a woman had actually consented to some kind of sexual activity beforehand, I'm asking you, is your view that warrants the death penalty by having rocks thrown at her head? Is that the position? Is that the territory you're now staking out?
Since we don't live in a theocracy, no, that would not be my view. But under that theocracy, then yes, I would.
So you think it was moral then? So you presumably think that God is maybe the arbiter of what's good and bad,
morally justified,
and you think that it was morally justified to kill women by throwing rocks at their head because they weren't virgins. Guys, enough said. Moving on to our next guest.